Sanjay, I want to circle back to why Canada is doing this. And are there other countries that we are modeling our framework after, or at the very least, I guess, learning from their mistakes?
It's a great question. Um, there are very few countries that have mandated this top down from a public policy and regulation standpoint. Australia and UK are probably the two largest jurisdictions that have actually done something with this. UK was first, and Australia was next. And I was living in Australia actually while open banking was being rolled out.
Okay.
The top down view of open banking is that it really leads from a place of what people are calling consumer data rights. And open banking is a first step in what is typically or somewhat sometimes called open data, the journey to open data in evolution of where we're trying to open up the freedom to share and collaborate with data. And so what Australia has done in particular, I know a fair amount of this firsthand. What Australia has done is they started with banking as an industry where their mandate is really to have consumers control the data, control their data, and have much more ability to manage what is shared and what is not shared. And what's next off the rank for them, next cab off the rank for them is going to be energy. So they're going to start looking at doing a similar type of thing for energy that they're doing for open banking. Other jurisdictions like Singapore are taking a bit more of a market driven approach. So there's no official mandate, but the regulators are extremely focused around how to support and drive more open banking and innovation in the ecosystem. Things like digital identity, automating data sharing through things called APIs, et cetera. And so what's happening here, I think Canada can learn from both, right? And I think that what Abraham Cutchin, who's the leader for open banking Canada, he's a really unique background. He's played in he's worked in public and private sector, and he's lived in Asia Pacific for a while. He's in Canada now, and I think his perspective to be able to work across the different models is going to be critical here. So I think that there's a lot to learn from the Australia, from the UK experience, but also from the standpoint of innovation, and I would say financial inclusion as well, Singapore and Asia Pacific.
Yeah, I want to touch on that as well. Um, Going back though, like anything, execution is key. And you had alluded to this, Sajay, that there's a lot of complexities to this. My understanding was that the goal of open banking, or to have it here, was like January, and we're past that. So what's been the holdup? Like what are the sticking points that they're working through right now? And when are we going to see it?
Well, I think there's set to be some action and delivery in the middle to late part of this year, and I won't I won't I won't go into the dates because they do shift a bit, and I want to give the government the ability to sort of flex on doing the right thing. Yes, they were supposed to have started deploying things earlier this year. I think this is a very, very complex issue to solve, and I did touch on it before. The policies and guidelines, the intent, at the highest level is probably fairly easy to grasp. However, the details on how these things are going to actually work, the detailed policies on guidelines, things like keeping our data safe and making sure that accredited and participating institutions follow those guidelines and creating ways to monitor and assure that they're following the guidelines and that the data is safe. Those are all things that are going to take time. So in fact, the first release and first rollout of open banking is going to be what's called read only. So it will be about publishing information, but not consuming that information. And I kind of see that as a soft launch of how this is going to go. So the execution, if it is delayed, it's because this is extraordinarily complex. In addition to complying with the government's policies, guidelines, and procedures, many of the banks, and I do work with a lot of the banks very, very closely. I know from a back end perspective on their infrastructure is extremely complicated to make some of these changes, especially around things like consent and permissions, because previously they didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
So bolting those capabilities on is actually quite complicated.
Okay. We only have 40 seconds to the next commercial break, but you just hit on something: the financial burden on this for the industry. Is it going to just get passed on to consumers, or could we actually see some cost savings?
I personally think it's going to create more competition, and with more competition, you tend to see costs come down. I think what's going to happen for consumers is one, lots more choice. For those who participate and choose to share their data, I think they'll have access to much more choice, probably more financial incentive to participate in programs or byproducts they previously didn't have before. So I do think that more choice, cost coming down is going to be the reality. However, that's, we have to see how things play out, because
Yeah.
this is a pretty substantial investment that the banks and the government is making.